Okay, recent challenges faced by supply chains and their impacts include, of course, the disruptions due to COVID, which have produced consumer spending shifts, delivery mode shifts, dealing with workforce implications, and the shift from lean to agile and resilient supply chains have increased costs of the supply chain and have materially added to inflation. Recent geopolitical uncertainty has also produced some volatility in supply chain design and operations, and it appears that more disruptions are on the horizon. What's the best balance between cost, service, and risk? What are the best practices in next generation supply chain design? What are the skill sets needed by the next generation supply chain workforce? A culture of continuous improvement seems to be needed now more than ever. And issues to be addressed in this session will focus on the next generation workforce, and the key takeaways are strategies to determine what supply chain gaps need to be closed, strategies to build continuous improvement mindset, tools to drive operational excellence, and strategies to lead change and celebrate success. And with that, let me introduce our first panelist, Keith Ingles from Raymond Corporation. Keith, please tell us a little about yourself and the continuous improvement mindset and culture at Raymond.
Thank you, Chip. So my name is Keith Ingles. I'm the RLM Manager of Solutions Support Center of Raymond. We do continuous improvement mindset and culture for our network and for customers. And today we're going to talk about a few things that support that. First, what is a continuous improvement mindset? So as we change and challenge ourselves to enter a continuous improvement mindset, we worked very diligently to understand what is a continuous improvement mindset. We've been able to boil it down to really a couple of things. A continuous improvement mindset starts that associates understand they come to work, they add value in two very distinct ways. The first way they usually understand, and that is the value of doing work. When they do the work that they're supporting for their customers, be that a service or a product, whatever they're doing to support their customer experience, that's the actual work they're doing. The difference between typical associates and a continuous improvement mindset associate is they recognize the second value add way that they come to the workforce each day, and that is by bringing Kaizen or ideas to improve how the work is done. By taking that pause to look at their workspace and look at the deliverable to their customers, they're actually thinking about ways to better deliver, better provide a great customer experience. Now, we've also found with a continuous improvement mindset, often associates in the workforce that do not yet have a continuous improvement mindset or have not experienced that these tools, these methods, these approaches help them in their workspace, often can meet the Kaizen and the continuous improvement mindset with some resistance. So be diligent. You can overcome this resistance with coaching and good sharing. Kaizen in the workplace often feels like initial work. It adds work to the individual. So there is that resistance piece of, I don't want to stop what I'm doing to provide value to my customers and do work. Here I've shared a picture of a tire press that we did at one of our facilities. And you can see it's not really an easy work area. This area we press tires on for our equipment, and the associates go into the work area to grab the tires and set up the press and put them and prepare them to be installed. So when we come to this type of work area with ideas to improve, it's going to take a lot of work and it may take some time. Ultimately, the work area became this through project. We improved it quite a bit. So as an associate looking at the work area, which work area would you rather be entering? And certainly, I hope the second. The second is much easier. You'll notice things like we turned the tire rack around that was angled out from the wall. So the associate would have to walk around the tire rack to get the tires, to get the access. It was quite difficult. We actually took the tire racks, emptied them, flipped them so that the associate could walk straight down from the press, get the needed supplies, the tires, and get back to the press very easily. All the tools were put in place, all the PPE and safety gear were put right in the place where it was easily found, easily accessed. That did take work, but all the value add work of pressing the tires was easy after that. Continuous improvement mindset also learns that you can't leap in one jump to the top of a mountain. You can't leap across the canyon. When we start practicing continuous improvement for the first time, often one of the key challenges is breaking that task down to small manageable bites. We can take the step in front of us effectively. We can't jump over hurdles. We have to work through them step by step, piece by piece. That's experienced continuous improvement mindset. So ultimately, how do we reach those large, difficult goals, such as reaching that mountaintop, reaching that difficult challenge in the workspace? It's literally through that 1,000 steps. So we keep taking that 1,000-mile journey step by step, moving towards that goal. And often when we see progress, we become energized and excited, and often draw others in to support us to move towards that large challenge. Continuous improvement, when it's applied in the workplace, creates a very energized atmosphere. Associates are working together, not just to deliver a great experience as we do it now for our customers, but to find better ways to deliver that experience. Ultimately, we're looking for ways to make work easier, because easier is efficient and effective for our customer deliverable. And it doesn't matter if we're in a supply chain, delivering materials, what materials we're delivering, or providing a service. The continuous improvement mindset helps to challenge that workspace and find ways to better offer that deliverable to our customer. Ultimately, then, continuous improvement is not adding work, but rather how we approach work. So when we come to work with that continuous improvement mindset, an associate realizes that the value add is the deliverable, but also finding ways to improve it. It becomes part of the workday. And so it's not typically those large projects, but those small steps of improvement all along the way. Here I wanted to share a couple of examples that we had from a couple of our parts teams. The example on the left is before continuous improvement, we had replenishment time. This is a parts restocking area. Replenishment time was 28 minutes. We noticed it was 28 minutes for the team to receive parts, inventory the parts, put them in, get them assembled, put them away into inventory. And this happened 3 to 4 times a day based on incoming small shipments. As we looked at the process, many things were changed. The associates were, of course, involved. The key is to involve the associates who work on the floor, because they're going to see these opportunities more quickly and more fully than someone just observing at a distance. We did many, many changes. We set up what we call a gold zone, the most high volume movement of parts, and move those parts forward in the area. A silver zone, the less frequent parts, and then a bronze zone, parts that are in the lower moving area. So we kind of sorted how the parts were put into inventory. We also did things with receiving, how the paperwork was processed, how the parts were put in, how they were physically received, and we moved all the receiving area and the parts stocking area closer together. So through the work of that, the team lowered that replenishment time to under 5 minutes. Now that wasn't in one swoop, it wasn't one change. It was through many, many changes and many, many steps towards process improvement. But ultimately, putting parts away, which used to be kind of dreaded frequently through the day, now was very simple and a very quick part of their day. An example on the right, this was one key Kaizen, but the parts team had to walk out to the shipping parts area. The office team would have to walk out, talk to the team to see what the status of shipments was, what the outbound time was, what was going on, if there were any delays or back orders. They did not have an opportunity to easily communicate back and forth. Emails and digital devices didn't work because the parts team were physically moving around the parts area. So they weren't readily accessible and they were very busy. We found one Kaizen did make a big improvement here. We added walkie-talkies to all the members of the team. And so by adding a communication medium that hadn't been there before, this Kaizen allowed the office team to communicate with the parts team about the status of any shipments, inbound, outbound, anything they need to check on, any back orders, get quick and easy updates. And we found after they implemented this, the parts associates were far less disrupted in their day by a quick response on a walkie-talkie than they had been previously by having to stop their work, answer a question, and go back to work. And of course, the office team simply was not walking those steps. They simply responded from their desk. These problem-solving examples provide really great experience for the morale and the associates in the work area. And when people experience that a continuous improvement mindset helps them in their workspace, they learn that they would like to do this more, and we find that they understand how to do it. They become confident and they want to repeat this process, the process of repeating how they do work. They want to make more improvements and find ways to make their work, their deliverable, even easier. When they understand this and are confident to begin repeating it, we have learned to call them bright spots. They are bright spots in our challenge to build a continuous improvement mindset. Bright spots add a nice element for us in that they help create energy, confidence, and help others overcome challenges. When you first start building a continuous improvement mindset, you build them usually one or two at a time, a few people who get the chance to participate in these process improvements, in these Kaizen, and they start to gain confidence and experience and grow. But the other thing, as we as coaches and other bright spots, will create the opportunity to build more bright spots. As your workplace fills with bright spots, eventually these bright spot continuous improvement mindset practitioners will start to become the majority of your organization. When the continuous improvement mindset in the associates becomes the majority of your organization, now you're actually moving towards a culture of continuous improvement. So it does take time and effort to build, and it does take some deliberate coaching and development of your associates. But in the end, it's an incredibly high morale, high energy workplace. People come to work and enjoy it and look forward to providing their customer the best possible experience they can. So just as a quick review, we've talked about three key things. The continuous improvement mindset is seen in the associates who see and bring Kaizen ideas to the workplace. Remember, they have those two value adds to the workplace, doing their work and bringing Kaizen ideas for small improvements. They're not large jumps, they're small improvements. The second piece is the continuous mindset breaks these large challenges down into the small achievable steps. We don't want to frustrate them trying to make great big leaps or great big changes in the workplace. We want to support them in making achievable small changes, but do so consistently each day. Finally, continuous mindset practitioners are bright spots who encourage other bright spots to develop. And when we have a majority of bright spots in our organization, we are developing a continuous improvement culture. Now I'd like to turn the presentation over to my associate, Stephen Holic, CEO of Holic Supply Chain Solutions.
Happy to be here today. My name is again Steve Holic. Thanks, Keith. And what I'd like to do today is talk to you a little bit about daily management. So with my company, I'm driving operational excellence, and I use this process quite often, actually, in the work that I do. This process actually of driving continuous improvement, through organizations, you can drive change and initiatives actually in many different ways in an organization. One way to drive change and innovation is directed from the top down of the organization through initiatives that are driven by the executive office. Another way is to drive technological changes and innovations. But really, the process towards driving daily goal achievement really needs to happen at the work level. So by the managers and the teams that are empowered to drive the daily activity that happens on the floor at the work. So daily management is really a key driver for process improvement to drive consistency, reliability at the level of the work where the work occurs. So that accountability has a subsystem of processes with managers to continually improve their operation through a structured and a visible manner in the work that's done by their teams, and helps them set the priorities for the day as well as the previous failures. So just quickly before we jump into the daily management program, I'd like to just have a quick survey and ask a question about, do you use daily management in your work today? Yes or no? And if you do it, where do you do it? In manufacturing, in transportation, in warehousing, or all the above? Okay, so we have a good feel for some people are doing that today. And when we talk about that process, hopefully some of the things we talk about resonate with you, but other things may be new, and hopefully you can take something away from it. So the goal of daily management and the process associated with this is really, driving a deep understanding for the people, and trying to build a winning team. And when we talk about a winning team, that's, a manager that he really believes in the concept and is trying to bring his team into a culture of driving continuous improvement daily. One of the keys for this process is really to have a safe environment to expose problems. So that safe environment, really drives a culture of non-blaming. So when issues do occur and somebody brings them up and there's a blame game, that is going to compress the daily management. So you want to expose those areas of failure and weakness. So leaders really need to be actively involved in the process, driving that every day. But they're also driving a sense of urgency associated with the daily activity. So what happened yesterday? What do we need to do today? And if we are off track, how do we get back on track? So it also creates an environment of continual learning and coaching, when issues occur, to provide feedback on the moment. It will drive accountability for the task based on the various things that are being presented, as well as drive delegation where leaders and various functions are presenting their metrics actually out to the group. Understanding that delegation wisely is key, and you should bring those people into the meeting. Asking questions in that daily management meeting is also fine, but there is a fine line between questions for clarification and questions for problem solving. So knowing when to take those subjects offline is also key to success of the daily management function. The meeting should be anywhere between 5 to 15 minutes. If it's going past 15 minutes, most likely you've gotten too deep into the subject and it's not really that digital dashboard, but it's more a problem solving session, which is different than daily management. So having the team take ownership to those issues and log them, that is key. So getting that issue resolution or action to drive resolution is the key. So focusing on the customer metrics, that's really what daily management is about, on where are we from a customer service perspective. So with that said, there are a couple key areas of that lean daily management system. So the first thing is the team leader system is across the network. So most times there are multiple daily management meetings going on either simultaneously or as in different time zones as facilities open. So for example, if you were to have 20 facilities, there would be 20 daily management meetings. And then in that daily management meeting, there's a repository, for the deviation. So what went wrong and what are the issues? That then flows into a PDCA problem solving methodology, which Debbie will talk about one of those things later on, how do we solve problems systemically? But that system of daily management and process to get everybody into that meeting, that is the key, to drive that. That deviation management flows up to that process as well for systemic problem solving. With that problem solving, there is a toolkit, but that toolkit doesn't need to be known by everybody, but will also drive that improvement process. So now I want to talk a little bit about the daily management dashboards and the process and what you need to do to make those things successful. So the first thing, that's really important associated with that dashboard is, within a few seconds, you should be able to say, am I winning or am I losing? How are we doing? It should be very clear and very visual in that dashboard. The second thing is, how are we trending? Are we trending up or are we trending down or are we flatlined? And then the third thing is, what are we doing to really affect the issue of the day, the countermeasure? So those things have to be very clearly visible in the daily management dashboard. I'll show you a few of them of how it works, and some of them are quite complicated, and people have got really sophisticated tools that drive the business analytics. And Shon will talk to you a little bit about some of those tools and the data, but it's the concept I'm trying to get across about what you're trying to measure, and at a glance, be able to see, are we red, yellow, green, and the trend line associated with it, as well as the root cause and corrective action. Now, one thing that's really important to mention here is that red shouldn't necessarily be seen as bad. Red just means there's an opportunity to improve. And so some companies and some people are like, oh my God, it's red, we're red all over the place. The mindset, again, of continuous improvement is red is good, we can improve. So we're constantly changing and updating these dashboards actually, to get more red on there. Because if you're consistently green and everything is green, like, what are you talking about? So it's not really a tool to actually report on how good we are and what we're doing. The critical aspect of daily management is really focusing on meeting the customer expectation. So 5 things really driving daily management is focusing on specific customer value, number 1. Number 2, making sure that it's not an extremely time-consuming activity to gather the data to do daily management. If your team has taken 2 hours to get together to do a 15-minute meeting to get all the data and put it in a tool, you probably don't have the right process. Really reflecting on what happened yesterday and what we're going to do today. So it's daily, every day. So daily management is not, hey, 3 times a week or every Friday I'm going to do it. No, it's every day. And then really having that objective measurement that's really not susceptible to personal bias or subjectivity, but having that data. And then the last thing, that's really important is really having leading indicators as opposed to lagging indicators. So where are we? And how do we get ahead of the next problem or the next issue? Really important as well as when a problem comes up is to actually have a form or a process to record the problem. So I give you a simple operational constraint containment form where when the problem comes up, the important thing is, what's the date that the problem came up? Who is the customer affected? And what's the issue? The problem solving process of the corrective action and the person, Debbie's going to talk a little bit about that, but getting it recorded in daily management, that is the key to success to solve the problem systemically. And there's all kinds of dashboards, as I'm showing you here, that you can have. The simpler, the better sometimes. But if you have good tools, you can drive a really complicated one like the one on the right. But if you don't, you can have one like on the left saying, how many orders did I get? How many do I have in work in progress? And show then just in the color dashboard, hey, who's red, who's yellow, who's green? And with the team coming together, they're like, hey, I'm in a good place today. I can help you, Zach. You need help. So let me help you. But though, the dashboards don't have to be hugely complicated. Some of them are, and some of them are not. But the important thing is getting it on a piece of paper and then making it better. So I do want to talk about the maturity level. And Keith did talk about, this is a journey. It's not an event. You can't jump to the top of the mountain. So there are different levels of daily management. So it starts with the basic daily management process, and then we can add value. And then we really have a mature process. But the category first about the KPIs, the team, the dashboard, the terms of reference, these are really important. And starting with something with the most important indicators, that's the part that you really have to have. The second thing is, do we have early adoption processes associated with adding value? And then finally, is there systemic problem solving, and do we have a process to take problems out of the meeting? And that gap analysis. So that's the basics on the setup. As far as the dashboard goes, having the KPIs, having the owners, the run chart, and the Paretos, that's what you want to get to. But starting just with a few elements on the dashboard and then having a Pareto under construction, that's great to get started. The second thing, if it's adding value, the dashboard, anybody can come in that knows daily management and be able to run the meeting or facilitate the meeting during the absence of somebody else. And then finally, having that Pareto and gap analysis, that's really important. So then, we talk about problem solving, and then having that problem solving, making sure the team identifies the problem solving. In the beginning, you may not have the countermeasure or a process to solve it, but recording it, that's your basic level. Then you have evaluated team that has fact-based problem solving with tools. And then finally, you have quick decision-making and quick escalation. And again, as Keith said, tied to that Kaizen event to get those recurring problems solved. Decision-making criteria, a system of escalation, that's also really important. In the beginning, you say to people, hey, bring me your issues. And they're like, we didn't have any issues. I said, you cannot, I know you had some issues. Okay, what's the burning thing keeping you up? So then they start giving you that. The next thing, they bring the next level of issues to you that need management supports. Things are a little bit more complicated. And then finally, you have this vertical process that's like aligned across all your daily managements, where you're kind of driving that end-to-end process. So finally, is the daily management impactful? In the beginning, you might not see any real improvement. You're kind of stagnant. It takes some time, but then you start to add value. The team starts to resonate with solutions. They bring forward suggestions. And then finally, at the end, there's evidence, and you start to go from red to yellow to green. And then you've got a green dashboard, and you say, okay, let's raise the bar. Let's bring it up to the next thing. So that's really the process of daily management. Hopefully I've given you some insight. And now I'm going to turn it over to Shon, and Shon's going to talk about the process of using that data and how you use that data, and then he'll turn it over to Debi. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. My name is Shon Clements, and I'm the Director of E-commerce Supply Chain for Ferguson Enterprises. And as I mentioned, I want to talk for just a few minutes about how we make data actionable. It's important to understand that not all data is created equal, and building a sophisticated model to drive appropriate action is a journey. Although every step of that journey can provide important capabilities and move you closer to your end goal. The foundation here is descriptive analytics that provides you hindsight. So these are things like static reports. Descriptive analytics tell you what happened. My units per hour for the building was 20% higher than average yesterday. From here, we move on to diagnostic analytics, which provide insight. This might be something like an analysis that tells you that your receiving functions typically perform much higher than your shipping functions. Diagnostic analytics tell you, why did it happen? My units per hour for the building was up because I had an especially heavy day of receiving that was not weighed down by shipping. From here, we can continue to build into predictive analytics, which provide foresight. This might be something like a more accurate receipt forecast. Predictive analytics tell you what will happen. Next week, my units per hour will be 20% higher than average. And finally, we can move into prescriptive analytics, which is where we can drive action from the data. This might be something like understanding overall workload, optimized ordering quantities, seasonal staffing to orchestrate inbound and outbound needs to drive higher units per hour across the network while maintaining customer promise. Prescriptive analytics tell you how can we make it happen. Each step of this journey brings you closer to the goal of using data to drive positive change. But we have to remember that data is not always a straight line and at times can be misleading. Given this information and nothing else, one conclusion might be that larger cities tend to naturally form along major waterways. However, another conclusion might be that major waterways tend to naturally form in order to connect larger cities. Remember that data should shape your conclusions, and conclusions should not shape your interpretation of data. During World War II, they were tasked with reducing the number of planes that were being shot down and began to do studies of planes that landed after their bombing runs to decide where to add armor. That study showed that the returning planes tended to have hits in the circled area, and a natural conclusion might be that those are the areas that need to be reinforced. However, the piece of data that wasn't shown were the planes that didn't make it back, meaning that the returning planes were an example of where an aircraft could be hit and still complete the mission. The areas that needed reinforcement were actually where the engines are and where the pilots and the defenses are. And this is where there was no damage visible in the data sets that they were looking at. Keep in mind that you can often learn as much from what is not there as you can from what is there. So how do we apply this in the real world? I'm an e-commerce fulfillment guy, so let's take a look at that specific part of the supply chain, though the fundamentals cover much more. In e-commerce fulfillment, there are really only two things that people care about. Is it precise and is it cost effective? But think for a moment about everything that needs to be monitored and managed in order to meet these two expectations. When we say precise, we mean that customers want what they want, when they want it, and how they want it. And when we say cost effective, we mean that cost should work as a competitive advantage. These are the only two things that stick above the waterline, and all of your metrics and operations should serve one or the other of these two pillars. So think about precision. We need metrics and data to drive action around delivery speed and accuracy, fulfillment speed and accuracy, quality. All of this needs to be built on a foundation of omni-channel fulfillment and returns. When we want cost to be a competitive advantage, we need metrics and data to drive action around mitigating processing cost, proximity and intelligent allocation. How do we move inventory closer to our customers while leveraging scale? Reverse logistics. How do we meet the customer's expectation of fast and free returns in a cost-effective way? And the foundation of omni-channel fulfillment and returns is as important in maintaining cost effectiveness as it is in establishing the capabilities needed to meet customer expectations. This is a lot of data that we will want to monitor, but let's consider the metrics we might use for just one of these facets, processing costs. The challenge is always taking the information available and visualizing it in a way that is meaningful. In today's world, we are often data rich, but information poor. In this example, we are viewing a scorecard for parcel cost per pick shipped in a theoretical 10 DC fulfillment network. Now, the first thing we might notice based on the most recent monthly totals is that DC number 4 is the most expensive location to ship from. If we had no additional information, we might start leaning on that DC to improve their operational efficiency without understanding what is driving the expense. This is why we would also want to look at the stacked graph above to see what components make up the total cost. In this example, DC4 has a much higher transportation cost than other locations, and the inbound fulfillment costs are actually not in too bad a shape. In order to lower cost per pick shipped in this scenario, I may actually need to take a look at why the items are so expensive to ship from that location. Is the service area for this location much larger than other DCs? Is the facility closer to an import location and therefore always the first back-end stock, which would drive longer delivery distances? We also want to look at these trends over time to see if a DC is consistently under or overperforming, or is this a short-term issue? How are the locations comparing not only to the other DCs, but also how they're comparing to themselves over time? Cost per pick ship is only one metric that tells you how well you are managing processing cost, and it tends to show better results with the more outbound volume you have, as it helps to spread fixed cost and receiving costs over a larger denominator. Because of that, we would also want to understand the overall units per hour that the facility is able to process. This scorecard is similar to the last in that it shows how each facility performed in units per hour during the given month. Along the left axis, we can see the total number of units in the time frame, and the stacked bar shows us the component parts of that total. Along the right axis, we see the overall units per hour. When we have a facility that is outperforming their counterparts, we have the ability to quickly see what is driving that performance. If there is a disproportionate amount of inbound, particularly for parcel items, that performance may just be a byproduct of the mix and not something in particular the facility is doing to drive higher performance. Likewise, we can see which facilities have a disproportionate amount of LTL outbound volume, which can drag the overall units per hour of a building down despite the building performing well. Units per hour is a good measure of overall efficiency in the facility, but it tends to be driven by inbound because it's much easier to receive a case of 24 than it is to ship in each of one. Because of this, the best way to measure overall facility performance is to see who is balancing outbound shipping while staying efficient with inbound receiving to balance the labor in the facility. This chart shows performance for a blended cost per pick shipped, meaning LTL as well as parcel, and a blended units per hour. Leaning too heavily to drive lower cost per pick ship can lead to a backup in receiving or a reduction in necessary fixed costs that can ultimately have a negative impact on the facility. Conversely, a units per hour centric approach can lead to a degradation in areas that tend to have lower productivity, which unfortunately includes discrete customer fulfillment. In looking at this scatter plot, we want to highlight those facilities with relatively low units per hour while maintaining relatively high units per hour while maintaining relatively low cost per pick ship, as they are the ones that are managing the overall workload of the facility in the most cost-effective manner. That was just one example of an actionable metric for one aspect of supply chain. And it's important to keep in mind that the data management is a continuum. It begins with the generation of data. It's generated internally, externally, and by third parties, and every sale, purchase, hire, pick, pack, ship, or interaction generates data. After data is generated, it needs to be ingested. This is done through a variety of methods, including online intake forms, systems transactions, and others. Because we are utilizing multiple methods to ingest data that is generated in multiple locations and formats, it needs to be processed in order to clean, transform, and standardize the data. We also want to enrich the data where possible by merging it with contextual enhancements from additional sources. Our data is now generated, ingested, processed, and enriched, and we must look into organizing it, storing it so it can be retrieved and archived for future use. This also includes the ongoing care and feeding of the data sets. We next need to be able to share this data with multiple users and applications so that we can provide a single source of truth. And it is only after all of these steps that we can begin to effectively analyze the raw data and turn that into information. This analysis needs to be relayed to the lay user through visualization by creating a contextual representation of the information in the form of graphs, charts, and images. What makes all of this actionable is when you can use these visualizations to tell a persuasive story to compel the user towards the outcomes that you desire. Thank you for your time, and I'd like to hand it off to Debi Gann, who's going to speak about getting to the root cause of an issue.
Thanks, Shon. I'm Debi Gann, Vice President of Business Development and Marketing at Armada Supply Chain, and I'm talking today about getting to the root cause of a problem. So many people have used this, I think, since probably the beginning of time. I think if you were a child, you might actually have the ability to put this on your resume as a continuous use practitioner, right? Why? Well, what I think is really powerful about that is that it's something that we do instinctively. And I think harnessed in the right way, it really is a great way to solve problems. So this methodology has really stood the test of time, has been around since the 1930s, really rose up out of the Toyota Industries. And I think if you actually look at the man behind that corporation, you'll see that I think the way that this thought process came about really was who he was as a person. Regardless of the studies, regardless of the continuously inventing things, every single time he had free time, he actually sat down with a group of people and tried to come up with ways to make their community better. And I think if you use that as the basis for getting to the root cause, trying to make something better, this really is applicable to just about any situation. So the 5 times why is really just that. It is an iterative, team-driven, collaborative session that tries to uncover what the root cause of a problem is. So I think the other thing that's really important here is not using the word solution, right? So we always see that problem resolution, problem solution. The solution in this case may actually not allow us to get to the root cause, and we may be simply just putting a Band-Aid on maybe a symptom, or maybe not getting deep enough to actually fix the problem in the first place, which is why we use the word countermeasure. So truly action-oriented and seeks to resolve the problem, seeks to stop the problem from happening again. So what? I mean, why should anybody care? Well, I think a couple of things. It's a very natural way for people, particularly non-engineers or non-lean or continuous improvement practitioners, to actually get together and solve problems. There's nothing special required. So you have the ability to maybe just meet with a group of people, maybe a flip chart, or at least somebody taking notes. The whole premise behind this, though, is that it's not solved in a vacuum by 1 or 2 people. It really is a collaborative approach. And using the why really focuses this and makes it a disciplined approach, as opposed to allowing somebody to jump to a conclusion or simply finding a Band-Aid for a particular symptom. And I know this has probably never happened to anybody here, but sometimes when a leadership group or management mandates that something happen, fix this, do that, don't let this happen again, people genuinely respond. I think maybe not in the spirit it was intended, and maybe not with the understanding of what we were trying to fix. But being able to get a group of people together who collaborate and who understand the problem, and maybe in some cases are much closer to the problem, really do allow people to feel comfortable that they can express themselves. They can start to look for challenges, start to look for truly that very bottom thing that is causing this problem. And because they now have found it, because they understand how they got there, because they understand now what's needed, very oftentimes, I think, as opposed to a top down, that bottom up delivered result is way more effective and is longer lasting. Obviously, there's a way to go about it. That's proper technique really always delivers best results, right? In the end, you'll get there. But if you can make sure that the approach is collaborative, that we encourage participate, that no hierarchy or stigma in terms of being able to speak your mind, you'll find you get better results. I think another key thing isn't sort of looking for something or someone to blame. So the ability to be collaborative, to truly let people speak freely is really critical to the success of this. I know another one that we often see is, well, human error, or due to bad attitudes at the employee level, or miscommunication, bad communication, no communication, and other sort of generic reasons really don't actually answer the problem, right? Or don't actually solve the problem or answer the question. I think when you get to a conclusion like maybe bad communication or no communication, that actually in and of itself is another opportunity to employ 5 times why, to actually find out why there is missing or no or bad communication, and maybe get to the root cause of that. I do think it's vitally important, although this group is collaborative, that there's buy-in from a leadership perspective. I think not only can they, in some cases, provide cover, I'm sure some of the problems that have been solved by this group haven't been, without conflict or intensity, or, have opposing views, right? So the whole approach should be collaborative and should have support from leadership. And again, the best result in sort of following this process is really that the team that is engaged will come up with at least one, if maybe not a number of countermeasures that really will get to the root cause of a problem. So having said that, I think this is the case study that maybe a lot of people have seen. And as it has sort of taken on legs of its own, the folklore has grown and some of the names are changed. So I've seen this for the Washington Monument. I've seen it for the Lincoln Memorial as well. We're talking about the Jefferson Memorial here. And actually this case study really applied to both of them. The National Park Service used the same methodology for both Lincoln and Jefferson Memorial. So the problem that they were trying to solve is, although these monuments really weren't that old, the marble was crumbling, and there was significant deterioration of both structures, both the Lincoln and the Jefferson. So in this case, we'll focus on Jefferson. And in fact, it wasn't just minute, it was on one occasion, a 50-pound chunk of marble came crashing down. So obviously something that they needed to solve, especially given the public nature of these. So they asked the question, why is the marble crumbling? The funniest part of this is one of the key problem solvers in this really isn't known in continuous improvement circles or any kind of lean management circle at all. His name is Don Messersmith, and he was an etymologist. So I think that might give you an indication of where we're going here. But why is the marble crumbling? Well, turns out the National Park Service was washing both monuments daily. And they weren't just using water, right? There are chemicals that they needed to use. So I think to answer then, why is the marble crumbling? Well, the theory was we're washing it too much. We're washing it frequently. So ask that second question. Why are we washing the monuments daily? Well, guess what? Turns out birds. So when there are birds, there is, it's nicely stated here, but really bird poop, right? Lots of bird poop. So that caused a problem. The washings were needed. That, in theory, is why the marble was crumbling. So then people started pulling again. Ask that next question. Why are there so many birds? There were spiders. So spiders and insects were all over these monuments, which then caused the birds to come, which then meant they needed to be washed more frequently, which then meant perhaps that's why the marble was crumbling. So why are there spiders? I don't know. There's midges. And so I had to look up this, actually, what is a midge? So maybe this is also an entomology session here too. It's a small fly. It's not a gnat, but it's similar. So there were tons of midges at both of these monuments, but particularly focused on the Jefferson. Tons of midges. So the midges attracted the spiders, which attracted the birds, which meant that the monument needed more washing. So why were there so many midges? Well, the midges turned out to be attracted by the lights that were turned on at dusk. So I think in this whole premise, right, we've gotten truly to the root cause, the lights that are shining on these memorials are attracting this population of midges, and thus bringing sort of the whole food chain along with it, which then was leading to the deterioration of the Jefferson Memorial. So what's the fix? The countermeasure is this: turn on the lights 1 hour later. The midges have already found their place for the night. This delay in the lighting actually broke the food chain. So when there were fewer midges, there were fewer spiders. When there are fewer spiders, there are fewer bird droppings, and then the washings could also become more infrequent. And that really should be the end of the story, but it's not actually. The thing about these two monuments or that they sit on the banks of the Potomac River. It's beautiful. They're probably some of the most photographed images, at least in our country, if not around the world. But the most important part is when do these photographs typically take place? When do they look their best? At dusk with lights on. So after 6 weeks of getting to this whole root cause and realizing there was an 85% drop in the amount of midges, what there was an incredible rise in is the amount of complaints by citizens and consumers and visitors to these monuments that said, hey, you're ruining my shot. The photography doesn't look as good without the lights on. So I had no idea that actually this really happened. But the best part of this story is that for the next 5 years, instead of turning out the lights, they kept the lights on. All of these things continued to happen, and they tried to put Band-Aids on some of the symptoms. They used netting, they used plastic, they used spikes, they used sounds, they used all of this stuff, and it didn't work. So I guess the moral of the story is the management, and in this case, maybe the complaining public really wasn't enough to, was enough to get the Park Service to not necessarily do that. But I do have a happy ending. In the 2000s, they had money enough to redo the lights as part of an improvement process, and the kind of light and the colors of lights and the feeling from the lights were not really interesting to the midges. So thankfully, in the end, the solution worked. But it really, I think this whole conversation is really just fundamentally everything that all my colleagues before me have spoken about is just trying to solve the right problem and trying to solve at the beginning. The root cause of the problem is really what's most important. Chip, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Debbie. That's a great way to end the session. And I hope the session has provided everyone here with food for thought and further discussion about workforce development for next generation supply chains. Let me thank the panelists, Debi, Keith, Steve, and Shon, for very thoughtful and insightful presentations. Again, thank you for joining us. And with that, let me draw the session to a close.